Isabella Reed found herself in a situation that no one dreams of. You know that feeling of being trapped in a room with no windows or doors? That's how she felt about her engagement to Fernando. On the surface, it seemed like a good deal. He brought money home, her family relied on it, and she had security, right? But deep down, she knew it was all wrong. Brian wasn't the loving partner she deserved. Instead, he was controlling, his aggressive behavior simmering just beneath the surface. And Isabella? She was just trying to keep the pieces of her life from falling apart. But life has a funny way of shaking things up when you least expect it, doesn't it? Her encounter with Alexander Montgomery was exactly that. A shake-up. She never saw it coming. Picture this. One moment, she's navigating through her monotonous life, and the next, she's face to face with someone who exudes power and mystery. There was something about Alexander that made her feel alive. But don't misunderstand me here. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was as if, for the first time in forever, she met someone who saw her, someone who wasn't interested in controlling her, but in knowing her. You know how rare that is? It's like finding an oasis in the middle of a desert. Fernando, of course, was the exact opposite of Alexander. Brian controlled every part of Isabella's life. What she did, where she went, who she saw. It was suffocating, and yet Isabella felt bound to him. Why? Not by love, but by responsibility. Responsibility to her family, who depended on the financial stability Brian provided. That's where the real conflict sat, heavy in her chest. Sometimes the chains that hold us down aren't made of iron, but of obligations we think we owe. And those chains, they can be the hardest to break. But everything has its tipping point, right? That tipping point arrived when Alexander entered her life. He wasn't just Fernando's boss. He was a catalyst. Meeting him opened up something in Isabella she didn't even know was there. It was like she had been living in black and white, and Alexander brought color into her world. But let me tell you, this kind of attraction, it's not without its complications, especially when you've got a manipulative fiancé in the picture and a whole family depending on you to make sure everything stays in one piece. Still, there was no going back now, and sometimes a single meeting is all it takes to set everything in motion. From the moment their eyes met, something sparked between Isabella and Alexander that neither could ignore. You've probably heard people talk about love at first sight, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just about looks or charm. It was like they were two magnets drawn together by a force beyond their control. The problem? Alexander was married, and not just to anyone, but to Camilla Montgomery. Camilla was the kind of woman who planned every detail of her life down to the minute. She didn't just control the household, she controlled Alexander too. And even though the love between them had died long ago, that didn't mean Camilla would ever let him go. Alexander's marriage was more of a business arrangement, something to keep the family empire stable. And while he played the part of the devoted husband for the public eye, inside, he was burning with desire for something real, something passionate, something he hadn't felt in years until Isabella walked into his life. The attraction between them was like a wildfire, and once it started, there was no putting it out. But for Alexander, it wasn't just about the passion. His life was a complicated web of old wounds and unfinished business. You see, he wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was a man consumed by vengeance. Alexander had been carrying a heavy burden from the past, something that scarred him so deeply it shaped every decision he made. There's a certain kind of pain that lingers, even when you think you've moved on, right? For Alexander, that pain was like an anchor, keeping him tethered to the past and to a mission he couldn't abandon. Revenge. His heart might have been captivated by Isabella, but his mind was always working, always calculating how to make those who destroyed his family pay. So, while Isabella offered him a glimpse of freedom, of life beyond the cold walls of his marriage, he struggled to break free from the chains of his past. And that's where the real danger lies, doesn't it? The combination of passion and unresolved grief. It's like mixing fire with gasoline. It can burn so brightly, but it can also destroy everything in its path. Alexander knew he was playing with fire. Isabella was everything he wanted, everything that made him feel alive again. But at what cost? Because even if his heart yearned for her, his mind kept reminding him of the dangerous game he was playing, and the stakes were higher than ever. But in life, sometimes the things we can't control are the very things that push us forward. And Alexander was about to find that out the hard way. As their relationship deepened, Alexander and Isabella found themselves living in the shadows, caught between desire and danger. They had to be careful, meeting in secret, exchanging stolen glances when no one was watching, and savoring brief moments that felt too good to be true. It was thrilling, like stepping into a world where rules no longer mattered, where they could just be themselves without the weight of their separate lives crushing them. But let's be real here. Nothing that intoxicating ever comes without a price. And in this case, the price was steep, even if Isabella didn't realize just how much she was risking. Every time they met, Alexander's feelings for Isabella grew stronger. He was captivated by her innocence, her warmth, everything that was missing in his own life. Yet, behind all that passion, Alexander was still a man on a mission. Isabella didn't know it, but Fernando, her own fiancé, was not just a victim of circumstance. No, he was a pawn in a much larger game. Alexander had been carefully manipulating the pieces on this chessboard for years, and Fernando, with his violent nature and blind ambition, was the perfect tool for Alexander's plans of revenge. It was all part of the strategy, though Isabella remained blissfully unaware. And here's where things get tricky. While Isabella thought she had found love, safety, and an escape from the oppressive future that awaited her with Fernando, she was stepping deeper into a storm. Alexander had enemies, dangerous ones, and he was using Brienne to get to them. That put everyone in a vulnerable position. Imagine building something so beautiful, only to realize it's sitting on a fault line, ready to crumble at any moment. That's exactly where Isabella found herself, even though she didn't know it yet. And that's the problem with secrets. Eventually, they catch up to you. The relationship that had once felt like an escape now became more complicated than ever. Isabella was wrapped up in a world far beyond her understanding, and Alexander was torn between protecting her and fulfilling his need for revenge. The stakes were getting higher, and what started as a passionate love affair was now teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous. One wrong move, and everything could collapse. Not just for Alexander and Isabella, but for everyone involved. And when you play with fire, it's only a matter of time before someone gets burned. Camilla Montgomery wasn't the kind of woman who let things slide easily. When she began noticing Alexander's behavior change, the late nights, the distant looks, her instincts kicked in. You know that feeling when you just know something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's what gnawed at Camilla. So, in true Camilla fashion, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Hiring a private investigator was her first step. She needed proof, not just suspicions, and she wanted to expose Alexander for who he really was. Because, let's be honest, in her world, power was everything, and she wasn't about to lose hers without a fight. When the truth came back to her, it wasn't pretty. Alexander was indeed having an affair. And the worst part? It was with Isabella, someone she had never even considered a threat. For Camilla, this was more than betrayal. It was war. She was consumed by jealousy, but not the kind that makes you cry and feel sorry for yourself. No, Camilla was the kind of woman who turned her jealousy into a weapon, sharp and calculated. And with that, she began to plot. Public humiliation was her plan, to tear down Isabella in front of everyone and strip away the one thing Alexander had left, his reputation. But, as things usually go in life, plans don't always turn out the way you expect. When Camilla confronted Alexander, she was ready to explode, to let all her fury loose. What she wasn't ready for was Alexander's calm, almost indifferent response. That's when the real truth hit her. Alexander had never loved her, not for a second. Their marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement, something to keep the Montenegro Empire intact. All the years she had spent controlling and manipulating everything around her, it had all been for nothing, at least on the personal front. Alexander's cold admission was like a slap in the face, one that would ignite a whole new fire within her. With this revelation, Camilla's focus shifted. It wasn't just about punishing Isabella anymore. It was about reclaiming her power, her place as the true head of the Montenegro Empire. But Camilla was no fool. She knew this wasn't going to be a simple game of revenge. It was going to require careful planning, ruthless tactics, and no mercy. Alexander had already shown his hand, and now it was her turn to strike. And when Camilla strikes, you better believe she doesn't miss. Brian always had a gut feeling that something wasn't right with Isabella. You know that sense of unease when someone close to you starts to pull away, and no matter how much you try to ignore it, it keeps nagging at you? That's exactly what Brian was going through. Isabella had been acting distant for a while, and while Brian wasn't the most emotionally tuned-in person, he wasn't blind either. His controlling nature had always kept her in check, but now, it felt like she was slipping out of his grasp. And for someone like Fernando, losing control was unacceptable. It wasn't long before Brian discovered the truth. Isabella was having an affair, and not just with anyone, but with Alexander, his own boss. The rage that filled him was immediate and consuming. Betrayal is one thing, but to be betrayed by the two people closest to you? That was a different level of humiliation. Brian wasn't the type to let something like this slide. He was ready to confront Alexander, to make him pay for stealing Isabella's affection. But just as he was planning his revenge, Brian stumbled upon something far more devastating. He had been a pawn all along in Alexander's larger game of vengeance. Discovering that Alexander had been using him this entire time was the ultimate blow. It wasn't just about Isabella anymore. It was about how Alexander had manipulated him, made him a tool in a plan that Brian knew nothing about. This revelation stung deeper than the affair itself. Alexander hadn't just stolen his fiancé, he had played with his life, his pride, and his trust. And for a man like Fernando, who thrived on control and dominance, being outwitted in such a way was intolerable. The humiliation festered into something more dangerous, the desire for complete and total revenge. That's when Brian made a decision that would change everything. He sought out Camilla. She was the only person who hated Alexander as much as he did, and together, they could tear down the man who had betrayed them both. In a twisted alliance, Brian and Camilla decided to pool their resources, planning to destroy Alexander, and by extension, Isabella. But while Brian thought this was his chance to reclaim his dignity, he had no idea that Camilla had her own agenda. She wasn't just out to ruin Alexander. She wanted everything, and Fernando? Well, he was just another piece in her game. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic showdowns anyone had ever seen. Camilla and Fernando, now united by their shared hatred, orchestrated the perfect trap. They chose the biggest event of the year, a high society gala, where all eyes would be on them. The goal? To expose Alexander and Isabella's affair for the world to see, to strip away the glamour and respectability they'd been hiding behind. This wasn't just about ruining reputations. It was about taking everything from them. In Camilla's mind, this was the moment she would finally crush Alexander, the man who had betrayed her, and reclaim the power that was rightfully hers. As the night unfolded, the tension in the room was palpable. Alexander and Isabella had no idea what was coming, but Camilla and Brian watched them like predators stalking their prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it came, it was brutal. With all the guests gathered, Brian and Camilla made their move, exposing the affair in front of everyone, leaving Alexander and Isabella stunned and defenseless. Whispers turned to gasps, and soon the entire room knew the truth. But what neither Camilla nor Brian expected were the confessions that followed. Forced into a corner, Alexander did something he had never planned. He confessed his love for Isabella publicly. For a man like Alexander, who had always kept his emotions buried deep, This was a moment of complete vulnerability. He admitted to everyone, including his enemies, that Isabella was the woman he truly loved, and that his marriage to Camilla had been nothing but a facade. The room, filled with the elite of society, was now a battleground of emotions, with Alexander's reputation hanging by a thread. But even then, Alexander stood tall, choosing love over power, a move that shocked everyone, including Isabella herself. Just as things seemed to reach their peak, Fernando, consumed by his rage, lunged at Alexander. He wanted to hurt him, to make him pay for everything he had lost. But in a dramatic twist, it was Isabella who stepped in to stop him. In front of everyone, she confessed her feelings for Alexander, declaring that she would face the consequences alongside him. It was a bold move, one that left the crowd speechless. But while their love was now out in the open, the storm was far from over. As for Fernando, he may have gained the Montenegro fortune, but it came at a steep price. Alone, filled with bitterness and resentment, he inherited the empire that had destroyed so many lives. The power he had once craved now felt hollow, a reminder of everything he had lost. While Alexander and Isabella found peace in their new life, far from the reach of greed and betrayal, Brian was left to rule over a kingdom of ashes. In the end, it was clear that true happiness couldn't be bought with wealth or power. Alexander and Isabella had learned that the hard way, but their journey had led them to a place where love, not money, was the true treasure. Moral of the story: at the heart of every story, whether it's one of love, betrayal, or power, there's a lesson about choices. Isabella and Alexander discovered that true happiness doesn't come from wealth, control, or revenge. It comes from finding peace and love in the most unexpected places. Even in the face of betrayal, they chose to walk away from the power struggles that could have consumed them, proving that sometimes walking away is the strongest move of all. But what about you? Have you ever faced a situation where letting go was the key to moving forward? Or maybe you've experienced a moment where choosing love over fear changed everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Isabella or Alexander's place? If you're enjoying these twists and turns, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. There's so much more to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.